I think that his bluff is being called. I have to say in passing, I have to say that I am so impressed with the role that Britain has played. It's been so positive to see what we've been doing. Going over to the United States. Jonathan Powell went over to the United States and speaking to France and Germany, crafting the offer of the ceasefire, and then going to speak to the Ukrainians and crafting the response. I think that we have made a really positive contribution. It's not ended yet, of course, there's a long road, but at least bringing Ukraine back and getting the arms back from the United States and the intelligence back from the United States, and then putting the ball in Putin's court has been a really important step. We just need to make sure that the Europeans remain involved in these negotiations, and that we get a fair settlement, a fair peace, a lasting peace for the Ukrainians.
Emily is a Labour MP and chair of the very important Foreign Affairs Select Committee, a very busy committee right now. There's so much going on at the moment. We're looking obviously very heavily at the ceasefire efforts in Ukraine, but of course we mustn't forget that there's very important ceasefire talks about Gaza that remain somewhat in limbo. Now, Emily's actually just returned recently from a fact-finding trip to the Middle East, stopping off in Israel, in the West Bank and other places. So welcome to the show, Emily Thornberry. Emily, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So look, let's start with Ukraine. The negotiations are really on a knife's edge. It feels like the ball is very much in President Putin's court, but what's your reading of where things are?
Yes, what I take from what Putin has said is yeah, but no, but yeah, but no, but. I think that it's entirely reasonable for there to be a ceasefire and for then there to be negotiations. And I think that his bluff is being called. I have to say in passing, I have to say that I am so impressed with the role that Britain has played. It's been so positive to see what we've been doing. Going over to the United States. Jonathan Powell went over to the United States and speaking to France and Germany, crafting the offer of the ceasefire, and then going to speak to the Ukrainians and crafting the response. I think that we have made a really positive contribution. It's not ended yet, of course, there's a long road, but at least bringing Ukraine back and getting the arms back from the United States and the intelligence back from the United States, and then putting the ball in Putin's court has been a really important step. We just need to make sure that the Europeans remain involved in these negotiations, and that we get a fair settlement, a fair peace, a lasting peace for the Ukrainians.
And that's the key thing. I mean, I think there's absolute universal agreement that Keir Starmer, Jonathan Powell and the team around them have done a really good job over these last 4 weeks, particularly since the Munich Security Council and then, of course, that trip over. But when the history books are written, it's not just going to be about, Keir Starmer had a good couple of weeks. It's going to be, look, are we actually going to get peace? And, we're dealing with a very, very difficult, but we've got two very difficult characters. We've got Donald Trump and we've got President Putin. And what's really difficult for, despite the very, very good efforts of Keir Starmer and Macron and others, if there isn't going to be a military backstop, it's going to be very difficult for just French and British boots on the ground. I mean, what do you think will happen if we do not get this guarantee from America of a military backstop?
So I think that it isn't just about America and Russia. I think that it is a time for multilateralism. I think it is for smaller nations to be working together. And I think it is important that Europe has a voice and plays a role in it. But I don't think that Europe can do it by themselves. It's quite clear that we need to have support from the United States, even if Europe does take a leading role in defending. I don't really think it's going to be like peacekeepers in the classic sense. I think that what we need to have troops, European troops, or whoever is willing to help, in with the Ukrainians and making sure that there is no further incursions from the Russians once there is it's decided what the territory of Ukraine is going to be. And and that they go no further. And then with a guarantee from the Americans if it's necessary. We are all part of NATO. I would hope that it will be a natural thing that the Americans would want to do. And I think that it's only natural that the Europeans are particularly keen to ensure that we do protect Ukraine. I mean, we have been here before. When the Russians first invaded, there was the Minsk agreement, which the Europeans were heavily involved in, and Putin just broke it, just took the mickey. So we do need to have something solid, and it needs to be. There's no point in there being a peace deal which is only a temporary thing, because also there needs to be a great deal of rebuilding of Ukraine. And then there's the question, which I think is a really interesting one, is how much should Russia pay for the rebuilding? I mean, there's a lot of Russian money in Europe. Should we, at the moment, we've got it frozen and we're using the interest from that money to help pay for some of the assistance that's being given to Ukraine. But there's also a really live debate at the moment, Aisha, which is all about whether we should, in fact, seize those assets and say, actually, given that this was an unprovoked attack, this state money, should be used for rebuilding Ukraine.
And we've been speaking to Bill Browder about that, who is saying that he's quite frustrated that there hasn't been more progress on this. I mean, I think everybody agrees that is a direction of travel, but he was actually saying, I think we interviewed him last week, and he was saying that the problem is there's quite a lot of political will, but there's concerns from a sort of the officials in different governments around Europe are sort of slightly pushing back against that. So I mean, I think that's something that
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there has been some pushback, but I think that the wind has changed a bit. So I think that there have been politicians who have been listening particularly the European Central Bank is concerned about the future of the euro. And if Europe is seen as an unreliable place to put your money in, it could get, your money could get seized. Then that might undermine the euro. But I think that as Europeans have started to increasingly focus on Ukraine and the role that we need to be playing with Ukraine, and they're looking at the damage and they're thinking, actually, the truth is that this wouldn't have happened if the Russians hadn't broken international law. So let's use international law to our and I appreciate that there's a live debate as to whether or not it's on the right side of international law. But I think increasing numbers of people are looking at the analysis and going, actually, you know what? I think that it is only right. If you go and invade another country, you wreck another country's economy, then other countries in the region, if you have put your money elsewhere, then it's quite right for the international community collectively to say, we're going to spend this money.
Well, let's see how quickly that gets advanced. Look, I want to talk about the Middle East as well, because I sort of feel like that's slightly sort of getting lost at the moment, because obviously there's just so much news around Russia and Ukraine, and it's still very important. Now, you made a trip to the Middle East just recently. What's your assessment of where things are at the moment?
Yes. So we went to Saudi Arabia, and then we went to Jordan, and then to the West Bank, and then to Israel. And the first thing was that it is quite clear that people are really concerned about what the future of the West Bank is. We've seen for years, haven't we, demolitions of Palestinian homes and the building of Israeli homes on the West Bank, which, if we were to have a two-state solution, which the international community has been asking for decades, along the lines of the Oslo agreements, then there really shouldn't be Israeli settlements in those areas. But increasingly across the West Bank, there are more and more Israeli settlers are taking over, and increasing numbers of watercourses, rivers being taken over, the high ground is being taken over. People are being forcibly moved because Palestinians are being forcibly moved because they're told they haven't got building permits, and yet nobody seems to ask for building permits when it comes to this settlement. This has been going on for a long time,
right?
But it's been accelerated since what's been going on in Gaza. So whilst everyone has been looking at Gaza, in fact, there has been increasingly violent attacks on Palestinians on the West Bank. There was recently Jenin had the Israeli forces went in there with tanks, which hasn't happened for decades. 40,000 people have been displaced. And there are members of the Israeli government who openly say that the next step is to annex the West Bank.
Yeah.
Do you know, they're
And
not particularly interested in Gaza. It's the West Bank they want because, you know, if you
yeah,
read the Bible
and
in a particular way, that's where Israel ought to be.
and but there are also, there's still sort of, real concerns about what's happened in Gaza. There was
Yes.
a UN report out which said that some of the Israeli attacks on Gaza maternity wards and IVF clinics amounted to genocidal acts. What did you think about that comment from the United Nations?
I sometimes feel that when people talk about Gaza, they want to just talk about slogans, and I'm really not particularly interested in that. I get challenged a lot about, is this a breach of international law, or is this a breach of international law? And I have my own views, but I do think that it's the job of the courts to decide where there has been breaches of international law. I do try to be disciplined about this.
Okay, well, I mean, not in terms of, but
certainly evidence, you know, and that evidence will need.
I understand what you're saying about that. You know, that word genocide can be very loaded, but
Yes.
certainly about the reports of Israeli security forces having used sexual violence as a weapon of war. I mean, that's something that we have talked about, whether it's happening in Ukraine or Sudan or the DRC. I presume you think this is a bad thing that's been happening in Gaza as well.
I mean, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm certainly not saying anything other than, you know, the attacks on all of the hospitals is appalling. It is very difficult to see that some of the action that has taken place in Gaza could be part of legitimate war aims. It's been difficult to know, you know, at what stage the Israelis feel that they've won. The idea that there is a ceasefire at the moment, but that the Israeli Defense Force would be prepared to go back into Gaza. The question is, well, why? You can only go back into Gaza and be involved in attacks if you can say that you are legitimately defending yourself. And what are the war aims and what are your targets? I'm certainly one of those who believes that there should have been a ceasefire a very long time ago. And it's difficult to justify how the war has continued in Gaza over the last sort of 9 months.
And Emily, having been out there and you know, been speaking to a number of different people, what is your sense of this moving from a sort of ceasefire, which is still, you know, the elements of the ceasefire still being kind of negotiated? I've just seen that Hamas has said it's ready to release an Israeli American hostage, Edan Alexander, and the remains of 4 other dual nationals. But what's your sense of both sides being willing to move from a sort of ceasefire into a proper conversation about a lasting peace?
Yes. So the ceasefire comes in different phases, and we're supposed to have got to the end of phase 1 and going into phase 2. And phase 2 involves the Israeli Defense Force moving out of Gaza and moving towards a long-term peace settlement, with continuing with hostages being released and Palestinian prisoners being released. So that's what's supposed to be happening now. The Netanyahu has said, I'm not going to phase 2. I'm going to extend phase 1, and the Americans agree with me. I have to say, last week, when I had the Middle East minister in front of me, Hamish Faulkner, I asked him whether he'd actually seen anything to show that the Americans had said that phase 1 should continue, and he wasn't able to help one way or the other. So I just think that I'm suspicious when people say to me that Netanyahu's primary objective is just staying in power, and what he needs to do is get his budget through at the end of March. It does seem to me that the evidence is kind of about that and not about trying to move to some sort of peace settlement within Gaza. Those people that I spoke to in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, from the Israeli side, I really didn't see the kind of leadership that you need to have in order to be able to find a proper solution. So, I saw a lot of very traumatized people, but I saw very little vision as to what was going to happen next.
And does that make you feel, despairing of what happens next? I mean, just being realistic from what you've said there, you've based, and lots of other people have said this as well, that, Netanyahu, it's not in his interest to sort of move to a proper kind of peacetime footing on this. And of course, let's not kid ourselves, there's lots of still issues with Hamas on the other side.
Absolutely, but he's facing quite a serious trial. If his government collapses, he's back in court. There will be a number of investigations about Netanyahu. So he holds on to power, and his coalition is as fragile as it possibly can be. And so if he moves in any way on Gaza, he will shed people, and his government will collapse. That's why. It's one of the reasons why he doesn't want to move. He wants to kind of like have things frozen and just sort of survive on a sort of day by day basis politically. But that's not helping anyone when it comes to trying to sort out a long-term solution in relation to Gaza.
So given that he's not kind of going anywhere in the very near future, do you think we will just be in this kind of holding pattern then for the foreseeable future?
I think that there are moves afoot. I think that the initiative from the Arab states has been really helpful. In answer to President Trump saying, move everybody out and let's have a Riviera and all of this, they've said no. And they've said, no, we can rebuild Gaza, and this is how we would do it, and this is the work that needs to be done, and it is practical, and it is possible, and it can be done with the Gazans remaining as they are, where they are. That, I think, is really important. But I think there needs to be the next stage, which is, no one is going to invest in Gaza if they think that in 5 years' time there's going to be another conflict and Gaza gets bombed again.
Yeah.
So it has to be part of a long-term political solution, and the long-term political solution, and the only one that will work, and nobody ever comes out with any other suggestion that makes any sense, is a two-state solution, which means Gaza and the West Bank being connected and being connected as the state of Palestine, which needs to live in peace alongside a state of Israel, with the international community, and particularly the neighbors, the Arab neighbors around, holding the back of Israel, knowing that actually once this is settled, that relations can be normalized in the Middle East and we can all move on. But it will not happen until there is some hope and a path towards a Palestinian state.
Yes, and we all hope that point can come, but it does feel that that's quite a far way off at the moment. Now,
well, I think that there is a way, which is...
I mean, I'm just conscious of time, so we just got to just wanted to, just before we let you go, just ask a domestic question. Obviously, we're waiting. We've been looking ahead to the spring statement, and we are expecting a big announcement from the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, about cutting back the welfare state. How are you feeling about that?
I think at the moment I'm waiting to see what is said. I mean, I've heard lots of briefing and counter briefing and so on. I mean, I completely accept that there's something really wrong when more than 1 million youngsters are unemployed and not in training and don't seem to, are already kind of heading towards a life on benefits. That's such a waste of life and hope. And I think we really have to do something about that. And there are such large numbers of people, long-term on benefits. And, the state should be working towards getting them back into work, particularly since employers are always moaning that there aren't enough people in the workforce.
And what about cuts
we
to
need
people?
To have a mismatch.
And what about cuts to people who have got quite severe disabilities, cuts to their PIP payments, which really sort of are a lifeline for them?
Yeah. I mean, the Labour government should be looking after those who can't work and looking after them properly and ensuring that those that can work but who need some help are getting back into work. And I'm waiting to see what the details are.
OK, well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. That's Emily Thornberry, Labour MP and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.